Good morning, students. Let's start with the next chapter in EVS Part 2. The name of the chapter is Settled Life and Urban Civilization. In the previous chapter, we learnt about beginning of settled life. Now, we will continue with settled life and urban civilization. So this chapter is divided into 5 points. The first point is use of metals. Second, pots made on the potter's wheel. Third, trade and transport. Fourth, rise of cities and script. And the fifth is social organization in the ancient cities. So in the first point is about use of metals. Now you may have wondered about the first metals that humans used. Museums in Europe had large collections of prehistoric artifacts and antique objects. Prehistoric artifacts are the things which were made before there was any written record, and antique objects are work of art. A scholar named Christian Thompson introduced a method for classifying them. It is called the three-age system. Thompson classified the objects into three groups. You can see it on the slide. They are stone tools, Stone Age; copper tools and other copper articles, Copper Age; and the third is iron tools and other iron articles, Iron Age. So this was the three-age system. Thomson established, with the help of evidence, that stone tools were the earliest. So the first tools were made of stone. Evidence means collection of facts. After stone tools, the period of copper tools and articles was next. After copper tools, it was followed by the period of iron tools and articles. Accordingly, the three periods were named the Stone Age, Copper Age and Iron Age respectively. This gave rise to the belief that copper was the first metal to come into use. Actually, they say that gold was the first metal to be used, but gold is a soft metal, so it could not be used for making tools and any other implements. Humans then discovered another metal which could be used for these purposes. That metal was copper. Now gold was not used to make any tools. So then what they started making tools with copper. The period when copper came into use was known as Copper Age. Now you can see that's the picture of copper, the second picture, and the first picture is of a gold. Let's move to the second point. Pots made on the potter's wheel. The Copper Age was the age of many inventions and rapid changes. So this Copper Age was the age where there was different kinds of invention and changes. Now which was that invention? Invention was the invention of the wheel is the most important among them. You can see in the slide. Okay. It is generally agreed that the wheel was first used by the potters. Its use in carts and chariots probably began a little later. So first when the wheel was invented, the potter started using, and then afterwards they started using this wheel in the carts and chariots, as we can see in the second picture. Now, chariots are the two-wheeled vehicles drawn by horses. Let's move to the third point, trade and transport. Once the potters began to use a wheel, it became possible to make pots in large numbers. So once they started using the wheel, they started making many pots. In this period, people started making symmetrical and colorful pots with beautiful designs on them. Now you can see in the second picture, they even started making different kinds of designs on the pots. Then potters and other craftsmen. Craftsmen are people who do different kinds of work. So potters and other craftsmen began to live close to each other in the village settlement so as to manage their work more easily. So these potters and the workers started living together so that they could do their work and manage their work properly. We can say that this became the industrial area of that village, industrial areas where there were people working, where skilled craftsmen had their settlements and centers of production. Skilled craftsmen are people who do different kinds of works like pottery, carpentry. So they all started living over there. Okay. This happened mainly in those village settlements where the raw material was easily available. Now, where did this happen? Now, when you have to do a certain kind of work, you need all the things available, right? If you are making pots, you need mud. So, where did this happen? Where the village settlements had different kinds of raw materials to make things. And in those which were conveniently situated for trade. That means they could sell those things also. Such village settlements expanded rapidly. Now, which village settlements expanded rapidly? Where there were materials available and where there were people available to do the work. As the scale of production increased, trade too expanded with it. Okay, trade also, as the production started increasing, trade also expanded. Therefore, there was a need to change the old system of transport. So they had to change the system of transport. Now, how did they start it? What did they do? What change did they do? It was in this period that wheeled vehicles like carts and chariots were first brought into use. You can see in the slide that carts and then chariots were used for trade. In this picture, you can see that they were first used in Mesopotamia. Okay. Let's move to the fourth point. Rise of cities and script. Long distance trade, that means things sent to different countries where they were far. Long distance trade, rapid transports of goods and centers of large scale production are factors that brought together people engaged in different kinds of work. This gave rise to cities. It became necessary to keep permanent records of the expanding trade and growing production. Now they were selling things. So what happened? It became necessary for them to keep the records. Okay. Now we'll see how they kept the records. By now, signs and symbols had already come into use for the purpose of record keeping. We had learned signs and symbols, right? So they used to use different kinds of signs and symbols, as you can see in the slide, to keep the record of their trade, of their things sold. Okay. Next is broken pieces of clay pots. That is, broken pieces are called potsherds, in which with such signs had been found in large numbers during excavation. The increase in trade and production, now people started making lots of pots. So the it became a lot, so it was increasing in trade and production, and the growth in the volume of records to be kept resulted in much modification and improvements in the signs and symbols used for these purposes. In this way, each culture developed its own script. That means each culture had to develop their own script to keep their own record. So you can say that the cultures were there, that many script came into use, and they had to keep the records of what has been sold. Next point is social organization in the ancient cities. Now in this picture you can see, there's a picture where you can see that the potter in ancient Egypt, he was working on a rotating plank. That means there were new developments. So what happened? It is true that rise in trade had been the major factor that contributed to the emergence and development of cities. However, the culture of those cities had its roots in the culture of village settlements of the New Stone Age. So where the people were settled, they were also engaged in doing different kinds of work. The faith system rooted in the agricultural way of life continued in the urban way of life too. Okay, so then they were making different kinds of pots, and they were even growing crops also. The social life and festivals based on agricultural faith systems became more elaborate in cities that had prospered because of rise in trade. Grand temples were built in many cities. So there were temples also built in cities. They had agriculture. They were prospering. They were becoming rich. There were agriculture, that was, they were growing crops. They were even making pots. The pots also were being sold. Then after that, they even built temples in many cities. Chiefs of those temples became chief administrators of those cities. Later, the position of the temple head and that of the king went to the same individual. This was the beginning of the ancient urban civilization of the world. So we seen in this chapter that they started making pots. They even started growing crops. They made beautiful temples. Okay, so this way the people living in the village settlement were prospering. Okay, let's move forward. That's your homework. The first question is, the dash was first used by the potters. The second one is, dash was the first metal to come into use. And the last is, what is meant by copper age. So here we end with this chapter. We will learn the next chapter in the next class. Thank you for listening, children. Goodbye. Take care.